For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Great to have you, Michael.
Good morning, sir. Yes,
Morning.
so the
Good.
big news out of Asia Pacific basically is the fact that China has cut two of its key interest rates again, carrying on from cutting last week as well. Investors in that particular region are mixed about that, quite honestly. The Shanghai composite down about 0.2%, Sheng Seng composite up 0.2%. Hong Kong's down 0.5%, but basically it's still what investors are calling the dozing dragon right now, not really responding to these cuts, but it may well in the future. Now, Blinken, the US Secretary of State, and President Xi met rather unexpectedly, only for 15 minutes, but they vowed in their meeting in Beijing to stabilize the relationship between the US and China. They're talking about responsible behavior between the two of them. Again, it's just talk, and that's all they did. They only talked for 15 minutes, but it's felt to be quite significant in as much as it was an unexpected meeting between the Secretary of State and the President. In Japan, the feeling is that although Japan has signed a deal with the United States, it's still falling behind on electric vehicles, and it needs a big catch-up as far as that's concerned. That's what investors are saying about Japan, even though the Nikkei is doing extremely well. Let's go to the US and recap there. They're coming back after their day's holiday yesterday. Stock futures relatively flat. The investors quite like the fact that there was what we described as a hawkish pause last week from the Fed. So in other words, a warning that interest rates may rise, but for the moment, no. We're all looking towards what FedEx are going to do after the bell tonight, and there is a bipartisan ruling from lawmakers in the United States. Not so much a ruling, but a recommendation. They're urging Ford and General Motors to source away from China. So whilst it's funny, isn't it? So you've got business people visiting China, you've got Blinken visiting China, and back home you've got senators bipartisan urging General Motors and Ford not to be too reliant on China. Warren Buffett, though, is joining or has been doubling down on trading houses in Japan. It's interesting that his Berkshire Hathaway fund now counts Japan as one of its major foreign investments, given that it's invested in trading houses there. We're going to go to the Paris Air Show now. We did expect there would be a lot of orders coming for planes and a lot of rise in airline travel. It turns out that India, which has a domestic airline called Indigo, has ordered 500 planes from Airbus. Again, delivery 2030 to 2035. When, of course, that will happen, difficult to say right now, but 60%, Indigo has 60% of India's domestic market, and expecting more news out of the Paris Air Show as we speak. As far as the European Union is concerned, it's basically business there is fairly, and countries are stumbling really on their attempt to toughen the stance on China. Again, the EC commissioners have been saying to the member states, look, de-risk as far as China's concerned. Make sure that you decouple and get down to domestic production rather than relying on China. Again, a lot of countries are saying, no, we're perfectly happy with our relationship with China right now. As far as the UK is concerned, we've talked about this before. Interest rates will probably rise when the Bank of England announces its latest decision on Thursday, which is 2 days away, but there is a major mortgage crisis, no question about that, in this country. The level is now for 2-year fixed loans above 6%, and 50% of households are attempting to remortgage, and they'll be remortgaged on higher rates. And again, mortgage products have been cut from the market. So there is a big mortgage crisis in this country. UK's Labour opposition party are saying that there will be no new oil exploration in the North Sea. They will honour present agreements, but what they're hoping to do is to turn the whole of that economy green and invest in local government in Scotland and in other places as well. The unions are very much against this. They feel as though it will just erode workers' wages. And again, I mean, there's a lot to say about that. And how do you actually retrain oil workers to go to greener pastures? UK Morrisons and Marks and Spencers have been cutting their food prices, following on from Tesco. Things like tomato yogurt, minced beef, and so on. What people would normally regard as staples, they're following what happened at Tesco and also following what happened at Aldi. Allegedly, food prices rising by 19% in the UK. Oil relatively range bound at the moment, and gold similarly too. Gold range bound between 1940 and 1980. Plenty of Fed speak though coming up this week, so all those markets may well change. That's the global view.
With the mortgage debacle happening, people just waking up and seeing their mortgage prices shoot up, with the cost of living crisis side by side, are we heading for another 2008? Because how are these people going to be able to pay at the interest rates at which their mortgage have been repriced?
Well, I don't think we're heading for another 2008. I mean, if what you're referring to there is the subprime crisis, again, the market works very, very differently here, and those debts are not bundled up and to be unleashed onto the banking system in the same way that they were in the United States. But you're quite right to identify something which is unfolding day by day, that the cost of living is getting higher. Supermarkets, as I reported, are doing what they can. But the fact of the matter is that when people start to remortgage, and these are big family loans being taken out, they will find prices are very, very much higher indeed. And I'm afraid there is no relief in sight on that. So the whole of the mortgage market, and also industries which depend on disposable income, are going to find themselves fairly tight.
All right, so India go with a record-breaking order from Airbus, 500 planes. But in February, their competitor, India Air, had also ordered at the time record-breaking 470. And yes, you've talked about post-pandemic realities, first-time flyers in India. But is there more to this competition for the most planes bought or the most planes ordered? And then would this also reflect in other countries beyond India in terms of perhaps the restoration of the air industry or the flight industry for other countries?
I think you're right to identify that. I mean, I think what we're seeing is over-ordering, quite honestly, in the same way that, you remember, I don't know whether it ever happened to you, but I've tried to get flights where they've been overbooked. And a similar kind of thing is happening as far as aircraft manufacturers are concerned as well. I mean, there is a lot of suspicion of that. Remember, these are just orders. There's not delivery of planes. And Boeing, Airbus can do about 70 new planes a month. So it's a long way to go before those orders are actually filled. Is there over-ordering? Very, very possibly, yeah.
Well, two quick things. One, China, the dragon is dozing. It's at the brink of deflation. All the experts have been proven wrong. We talked COVID recovery, China will begin to just fly. But that has not happened. Now, China has additionally cut two more rates, the 1-year fixed rate loan, and also, another one, following on the back of two. Is there any cause for optimism there? Should that give us a cause to think, well, maybe China would, change course, contrary to what we have seen? And then secondly, Secretary Anthony Blinken of the U.S. met with Xi Jinping. It wasn't announced, it was unexpected, but do you have any idea what the specific details are? Nobody seems to know what the details are, other than that vague statement about stabilizing relations, establishing open communication. We heard about open communication the other day from Janet Yellen. So do you have any idea what exactly they discussed, apart from Anthony Blinken meeting Xi?
Nor does anybody else. I mean, all that people are latching onto this morning is it was an unexpected meeting. It wasn't scheduled, and the fact that it was unexpected and may have only lasted 15 minutes. Yes, of course, there are political platitudes. There always are at occasions like this. They may have talked about detail, but if they are, the Chinese and the United States authorities are not releasing the details, I doubt it very much indeed. I suspect it was probably just a shaking of hands, and as you quite rightly say, just platitudes as well. I think China. I was talking to an expert at Harvard University yesterday, talking about China, and his view was that they will have problems, but the fact that they are an authoritarian state means that they can fix those. Now, whether or not that's the way that you or I would do it, because we happen to live in democracies, would be very, very different indeed. But China, I wouldn't count it out. You didn't hear from my lips that it's suffering from deflation. I think what's going on is that the authorities are becoming more and more accommodative to what the investors are saying is a dozing dragon. It's still a dragon.
Suffering from deflation. Another thing that we don't talk about, especially analysts and commentators on China, we don't talk about the humongous debts. So how is China going to navigate its way around? And that's why deliberately a couple of weeks ago, I asked you about the Evergrande debts. When we talk about China, we act like though China is immune from a debt crisis, and China is in a debt pit hole as we speak. So with the slowing of economy and the debts China is in on, and the economy no longer growing on steroids, is this the beginning and the end of that rampaging bull in the quote China shop called China?
No, I don't think it is. I think that the authorities, as they are gradually dribbling in these cuts every week. This seems to be happening more and more. And I think that I share your view completely about Evergrande and it's being the most indebted company probably in the world. But the Chinese authorities are trying behind the scenes, I think, to try to put things right. And if that means being more accommodative as far as interest rates are concerned, that's what they'll do. Whether or not they'll be successful, I have no, like the next person, any idea at all. But you're right. You know, it is still by far the elephant in the room as far as China is concerned. But as I say, as the professor at Harvard was saying to me yesterday, don't discount what an authoritarian government can actually do. It'll be very different, but it'll still be there.
All right, so Michael, I saw quite, just moving away from China, going back to Europe, an interesting story with regards to some companies or businesses in Europe committed to providing jobs for refugees. And I highlight this because, of course, we know the numbers of people who have had to flee war-torn areas, especially with the war in between Russia and Ukraine, and also places like Sudan, Afghanistan. And refugee numbers have gone up to about 5.9 million in Europe. However, the challenge with this is that many of the refugees have said they are unable to find work or unable to work. Many challenges in this regard. And this is not the first time, it's happened before. But we have a peculiar situation because of the war in Ukraine and obviously Russian invasion of Ukraine. What do you think in terms of government support, even though these organizations have said they'd committed to over 13,000 jobs for refugees, but there are competencies. There's sometimes language barrier, sometimes childcare barrier because of the refugee numbers, most of them are women. How would governments beyond the private sector, looking to support in that area, how would they look to support and upskill refugees who come into the country?
That is the question, isn't it? I've got absolutely no idea how they do that. And I'm sure politicians will say lots of things, but whether business, I mean, what would you do? You're running a business, you've got some refugees coming without any skills, or maybe they do have skills and they don't fit your business. What do? Do you pass them on, or do you employ them as low paid people? I mean, it's down to business to do that. Whether they will accept people is a world problem. It's not just about Europe. It's about everywhere in the world, isn't it? How do we cope with this big shift in population, which is going to increase, as I understand it, not just because of war, which seems to be continuing right now, but because of the lack of water. I mean, that seems to me to be where the next problems are going to be, and we'll have to we'll have to redo that. It's not. Politicians can say what they like. I think it's down to skilled people coming across and using their skills in jobs. As far as the UK is concerned, that's been going on since Shakespeare's time, long ago, when the Huguenots, for example, came across here as well and started businesses, and the city started on those kind of things as well. So we're well used to that as a nation, but how business adopts those, I just do not know.
Well, Michael, just before you go, Do Kwon, the South Korea cryptocurrency king, has now been jailed in Montenegro for 3 months. But he's been in detention since March. He has cases in the US and in South Korea. Isn't this like a slap on the wrist that is not going to, discourage fraud within this cryptocurrency space?
I don't think it will discourage fraud. No, I see I see the whole crypto universe as being something which will eventually be adopted. But right now, it's like the Wild West. And I don't feel as though it's an investable asset. It doesn't feel like one to me. There's too much doubt about it right now. It's very much for young people to get involved. It's still gambling. As soon as it becomes investable and as soon as there's regulation around it, then I think we can start to talk seriously about it. Until then, carry on if you wish.
Thank you, Michael.